Hello, everyone. This is John Simonson, Wild Rivers Trout Unlimited chapter. We are continuing our series on the different fisheries we cover in northwest Wisconsin. And today we have Max Wolter, the Wisconsin DNR Fishery Biologist out of Sawyer County. Welcome, Max, and take it over. I don't know if I should say
Thanks, John.
that.
Thanks for
Sorry.
having me. This
You
is
bet.
cool. I'm glad you guys are doing this and getting this information out there. I've watched some of the
Yeah,
other ones and,
good.
so many great trout resources to talk about in Northwest Wisconsin and cool partnerships that we have with Wild Rivers Trout Unlimited and other groups and agencies. And that's kind of going to be the focus of what I'll talk about today. Um, Looking at the Namekagon River, which is, one of the more popular trout fisheries in Northwest Wisconsin. Um, Great reputation. And so I'll be talking about some of the work that we've been doing to monitor the trout fishery over the years, some of the trends we're seeing. Um, and there is a report on this. I'll mention that too. So you got this video, it's going to have a lot of the information, but if you want to go deeper on this, you can go on dnr.wi.gov and search for fisheries reports, and we've got a big report that's got a lot of this same stuff. So let's get into it. And I got a couple videos. Um, the Namekagon River is really special for a number of reasons. One of which it has this high quality brown trout fishery. So this is me with one of the nicer trout that I caught last year. Um, and this is what people are coming for, right? This isn't a place where you're expecting to catch 30 or 50 trout in a day, but you have a chance to catch some really high quality ones. So there's the thing people are looking for. And you can do it in a really cool setting too, because you have this National Scenic Riverway. Most of the shorelines are in public ownership, so they're wild, they're undeveloped. And then we have a ton of really good access as a result. So I'll get you kind of oriented to the part of the river we're talking about here. We've got Hayward in the southwest corner of the map, and then the river obviously comes down from the cable area, which is up in the northeast corner of the map. And I got some green boxes here showing a couple landmarks along the water, the different flowages. All of the yellow boxes are sites that we survey to monitor the trout population. But the one I have highlighted with this red box is the Tag Alder Road Trend Site. And trend site within DNR means a site that we survey more often. So, some of these sites we may get there every 3 years, 5 years, something like that. The Tag Alder Road site is one that we survey every single year, and that allows us to really closely track what's going on with the population. And then we can extrapolate those findings to other parts of the river too and say, okay, this is what we're seeing here. This is probably how things are looking up at Leonard School, for example. So you're going to hear me talk a lot today about this Tag Alder Road trend site. Here's a little more detail on that zoomed in map. So we're going from Tag Alder Road to Larson Road. It's 0.8 miles that we actually cover. So it's not the full distance between those two roads, but it's most of it. And we have surveyed this site every year from 2006 to 2024. So we've got really nice annual data. It has been surveyed a few times before 2006. We did miss 2020, so there's a little bit of nuance there, but it's pretty much a continuous data set, which allows us to tell a nice story about how this trout population has changed over the last roughly 2 decades. We do one section of this site where we're going after all species, and we're going to collect minnows and sculpins and everything else in addition to trout. And then we have a larger section that's just game fish, and that includes trout, but we also do see northern pike, walleye, occasionally smallmouth bass. So we'll collect those too when we have data on those other species as well. There's another video showing you how we survey. You get the kind of the aerial view here of our electrofishing team. We get lots of people out for this one. We're using electrofishing barges, so you can see the guys pulling the otter sleds. Those have a generator. Those are creating electricity that's going through the wands. I'm kind of in the middle of all this. I've got a wand and a net. We need at least two barges to cover this river. There's some places where we probably realistically need three or four. But we survey it with two barges. In this video, the two teams are kind of coming together. These are all red horse that are jumping, but there's some trout you'll see as well. Um, and we're kind of converging because there's a good piece of structure here. You can see it's about waist deep. There's some nice wood in there. And so I'm swinging that probe in there to kind of drive some of the fish out of the wood. And then you're going to see some of the guys behind grabbing trout. When we catch something that we're looking for, we put it in the, he's got a nice trout right there. We put it in these tubs on the boat that have water in them. We try to cycle that water pretty frequently to keep it nice and cool, keep the fish happy until it's time to measure them. So in many ways, it's just like fishing. You know, you got to know where to look. You got to know kind of how to approach any individual spot to actually get the fish. The only difference is we don't need them to bite anything, and we can go in and get them whether they really want to be got or not, so to speak. One more video for you. This will have some audio so you can hear the river and you can kind of hear the noises of everybody working. So this is us measuring those fish we just captured. Recording everything. And then you'll see some of the staff from the Park Service. They're kind of helping with the fish health here, giving these fish a chance to kind of wake up again after being stunned. It's usually pretty temporary. Most of these fish are kind of fully functioning again within a few minutes. So kind of walk around, see the scene here. I think I'm going to take you underwater here in a moment. You'll get to see a fish as it's waking up. So there you go. So this is a fun survey, and it's also a bit of a time capsule. You know, as I was preparing for this presentation, I was going through all my files and looking at all the photos I have over the years. You can see how I've changed from my first year working for the DNR in 2012 to 2024. Lots of photos of these guys. That's Frank Pratt. He was the biologist before me, one of the legendary protectors and advocates for the Namekagon River. Russ Warwick, the fish technician. These guys handle a whole lot of fish on this river doing this survey and still come out once in a while to help out. This is Jeff Butler. Jeff worked for the Park Service. Jeff actually passed away just a few months ago, so we'll be thinking about Jeff when we're out on the river this summer and remembering all the times he helped out. Lots of other Park Service staff too. So you see all the green and gray shirts. Obviously, they're one of our key partners in managing this river fishery because they manage the land, and that's a really important part of it. So they'll send a lot of staff out to help with this survey because we do need a lot of people, and it's a great opportunity to collaborate and visit with them and their staff. Their biologist is Marion. She's out here on this survey most years. We've had Trout Unlimited folks come out. We've had fishing guides come out. We've had Conservation Congress people come out, including some of the youth delegates. You can see some of the young people in these photos. So this is an event. This is something a lot of people have participated in over the years, and it brings a lot of people and agencies together to check up on the river and see how things are doing. A lot of DNR staff. We got wardens, land managers, wildlife biologists here. We got our Brule team. They come down and help out. So a lot of DNR people involved in this too. And lots of people want this fish photo, right? They want their image with the big trout. So I've just files and files and files of like this. And then I also have a lot like this too. They're slippery. So let's start to get into the data a little bit and what we see when we're surveying this stretch. So the first thing I want to talk about is actually not trout, it's everything else. We see over the years many different species here, really high diversity, which in one way is an indicator of good habitat, right? You want to see high species diversity, but when you're talking about trout streams specifically, when you see a lot of species diversity, and we've captured 43 different species at this site, that is also indicative of a thermally marginal trout stream. An ice cold trout stream that's running 55, 56 degrees Fahrenheit straight out of the ground would have brook trout, maybe some brown trout, maybe a couple other species like sculpins or mud minnows or something like that, but it certainly wouldn't have all these other species like chubs and a bunch of dace and darters and things like that. So high species diversity is an indication that this is a trout fishery that's kind of on the edge. That's also a reason why we are primarily seeing brown trout in this part of the river and not brook trout. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So a little bit of a warning sign, a little bit of something that we need to keep our eye on going into the future is that this is not the coldest water out there. We do have a good trout population, but we need to be aware. So let's talk about brown trout. This is the thing people are looking for. They want to come and have that chance to catch a really nice brown trout. But we're actually going to build from the bottom up here in our look at the fishery. And we're going to first talk about recruitment, which is a fisheries term for the number of new fish coming into a system. And the term you'll hear is young of year trout. So a young year trout's one that's born in the winter, and we're surveying it within the first summer. So it hasn't even been in the river for a full year yet. It is a young of year. And this is one of the things we're looking at in that Tagalder Road survey. A young ear trout's going to be 2 to 5 inches in length at the time we're out there. And what you'll see is it's highly variable from year to year. So here's what we see for young ear trout at that Tagalder Road trend site. You can see a lot of ups and downs. It's not consistent. Some year classes are bigger than others. 2019 was kind of a banner year. That was the biggest year class we'd seen out there by quite a bit, almost doubled the previous high water mark. Obviously, we didn't have a survey in 2020, but we had really nice year classes in 2021, 2022, and 2023. Then we broke our previous record in 2019 last year in the 2024 survey. So lots and lots of really strong recruitment in recent years. One of the things I attribute that to, especially if you look at 2024, is some really mild winters. So as we're talking about climate change, there are some short-term conditions that could be beneficial for trout. We don't have a lot of the anchor ice and really extreme kind of buildup in ice that we've had in past winter years. That can be hard on trout eggs, that can be hard on trout fry. So when we have a mild winter, it does create good conditions for those eggs and fry to survive. And that's part of the reason why we saw 2024 as a really high year class. But again, lots of trout coming into the system in the last 5 or 6 years. We're going to use kind of like an economic analogy. I would buy now on the Namekagon River and learn it, get out there, spend some time out there because you're going to be seeing a lot of fish coming up in the near future. We can also look at abundance of other sizes of trout, and this may be more immediately relevant to anglers if you're wondering what you might see out there this spring or summer. The note I want to make here, though, is about catchability. So I just showed you a figure, and I'm going to show you a few more, and it shows you number of trout per mile surveyed. Our catchability is not perfect. So if you see 200 or 600 trout per mile, it doesn't mean that's the absolute number of trout that are within that stretch of river. That means that's what we're able to capture with our not perfect methods. When you saw the video earlier, you saw fish shooting all over. We don't get them all. So what we get is what's called relative abundance. So it allows us to compare from one survey to another, and we can kind of see populations going up and down without knowing the exact number of trout that are out there. That's a really challenging thing to get. So just a note on that this is all a relative abundance. But it's certainly plenty good to give us a look at how populations change through time. So this figure shows, again, that Tagalder Road trend site, but now we're looking at sizes of fish that are not young of year. So we've excluded those. We're only looking at trout greater than 5 inches. The black line shows all the trout we catch greater than 5 inches, and the lighter blue line shows only trout greater than 12 inches. So that's the size that anglers might start to get a little more excited about. And what you can see here is some peaks. We had a really big peak in 2010, where especially we had a lot of young trout in the system. That didn't seem to translate to future years. And then 2014, you see a really big dip. And if anybody remembers what happened around that time, it was the polar vortex. So we talked about how mild winter conditions are pretty good for trout survival. Really extreme winter conditions, very tough on trout. In this case, it was really tough on even the adult trout. And we saw that some of the lowest abundance of all sizes of adult trout that we've seen in this particular survey over the years. However, the populations rebounded pretty nicely and kind of started to come back almost immediately in 2015 and kind of continued a steady increase. And in 2024, we actually had one of the highest abundances of trout that we've seen and a pretty nice abundance of trout over 12 inches. And remember, lots of recruitment between 2019 and 2024. And those fish take a little bit of time to get to 12 inches. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that continue to climb in the 2025 survey. But again, lots of this is based on environmental conditions. And that's going to be kind of my theme here is the things that are affecting the trout are, what's going on with climate, what's going on with immediate weather conditions, things like that. It's not so much harvest. We don't think there's a lot of harvest happening in this system. So that's certainly not driving these big ups and downs that we see in abundance over time. The other thing I want to communicate is that abundance is not uniform, and we know that. So we survey that Tag Alder Road trend site a lot, but we do survey other sites too. So in 2017, we did 6 different sites on the river, and I've overlaid the abundance of brown trout that we got at each of those sites. And when people call me up and say, "Oh, I want to go trout fishing on the Namekagon River," this is typically what I'm telling them about is, there's kind of a sweet spot, right? It is actually a warm river where it starts coming out of Lake Namekagon, and it needs a lot of groundwater and tributary input to cool down. At the mouth of Cap Creek is kind of where that process starts, but even there, we don't see a whole lot of brown trout. It's once you get down by Leonard School, Tag Alder Road, Larson Road, and then even down through Trout Run Landing below Phipps flowage, that's kind of the sweet spot. That's where we see, triple digits in terms of number of trout per mile in these surveys. We do sometimes see brown trout below Lake Hayward, which is that 13 per mile that you see down there, but not many. It's not a place where you could go and target trout and expect to have a really good multi-fish day or something like that. So um, basically, if you need a landmark, you want to be about 5 or 6 miles from Sawmill Saloon, and if you're in that range, you're going to have a pretty good chance of seeing a lot of trout. Let's talk a little bit more about trout size. So this is a figure from 2022, and this is a histogram of all the different sizes of trout we captured in the survey that year. And I'll point out a few things. First, you can see these 2 peaks. The first peak, that's our young of year, and there's a pretty clear delineation between those and our age ones, which are running from 5 to 8 inches roughly. But then after that, it gets pretty hard to pick out the individual year classes, right? So there's 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s, and maybe up to 6, 7, 8, or 9, and that's kind of about the oldest trout that we think we're seeing in the river. You can see one fish out there that's at 23 inches, and then a whole bunch of others that are they're kind of in the pack there between 10 to 20. But the other thing I want to communicate here is a whole lot of young a year doesn't necessarily result in a whole lot of 10 to 15 and 15-inch plus trout, right? There's a lot of bottlenecks that these fish go through. So even when we do have good recruitment, we certainly would rather have good recruitment than bad, but it doesn't mean that, the river's going to get overrun with trout. There's a lot of things that affect the survival of young trout. Predation is obviously a factor, including cannibalism, starvation, those winter conditions I was talking about that can be pretty rough, disease, whatever. So even between young of year and age 1, you start to see declines in abundance, and then between age 1 and 2, you start to see pretty serious declines in abundance. So it's pretty special for any individual trout to get to 20 or 22 inches or whatever. It's certainly not a given for any young of year that they're going to make it to that age and that size. But, that's exciting too, is to be able to talk about the big fish that are out there, and they are out there. So let's talk about them a little bit. This figure shows both the largest brown trout and the average of the 10 largest that we've seen at the Tag Alder Road trend site over the years. So we're typically seeing at least one, sometimes multiple 20-inch trout or even over 22 inches. And then that average of the 10 biggest, we're seeing a lot 18 to 20 inches in a typical year. But the thing that I notice when I look at this particular figure is this also tracks with abundance, right? So remember 2014 was a really low abundance year. It's also a really low size year. And that's just basically a math thing. If you're only handling about 50 trout, the odds of one of them being 20 inches is a lot lower than a survey like 2022 or 2024, where maybe you're handling 400 or 500 trout. You're going to be more likely to see some big ones just because you're seeing more fish. But the other thing you can learn from that is as abundance increases, like it has over the last 10 years since 2014, size is allowed to get better too. We don't have the condition that we'd call density dependent growth or density dependent size structure, where if abundance is increasing, size is going to suffer. We don't hit those levels typically on the Namekagon River. So we're able to, even when we have relatively high abundance for this river, we still have good size, so which is a nice place to be. And I don't know if we'll ever hit the point where we have so many trout that we're starting to affect our size potential. Um, if we do, that'll certainly be an interesting new era in the river's history. Well, so what about brook trout? We have some brook trout fans out there, and I've kind of alluded to them a little bit, but um, we do look for brook trout, of course, and we typically are not seeing them in most parts of the river. Now, there are some exceptions. So I have a few different stations here. I think this is from our 2017 data, and others, actually. We have some other survey data in here too at these different locations. We see a few brook trout up around County M. We see a lot of brook trout below Cap Creek, like immediately below Cap Creek in the cold thermal plume there. That's one of the best spots to actually find brook trout in the main stem of the river. And then you look at all these other sites, including the Tag Alder Road site, where we have 17 surveys and we've seen one brook trout. So in the summer months, the Namekagon River in most areas is simply too warm for brook trout. And so they're retreating to places like Cap Creek or Big Brook or, Mosquito Brook, and that's where they're gonna spend those summer months. And maybe they'll venture back out into the river in the fall and parts of the winter and stuff. But for the most part, this is a brown trout fishery because of the thermal conditions. And that's kind of where I want to cap this conversation and talk about the future. Climate change is going to be a really big deal for trout everywhere, and that's certainly true here. We are seeing some interesting seasonality where winter may actually be getting more favorable for brown trout, at least in the short term. But it's summer that we have to be concerned about, where, if we already have a thermally marginal stream, a stream where brook trout are already excluded, a stream where we have a lot of creek chubs and dace telling us, hey, we're kind of right on the edge of being a trout stream. It won't take a whole lot to push it past the point where trout are not going to be able to hack it in the Namekagon River anymore, even brown trout who are more thermally adapted to those types of conditions. So this is something we have to think about. Our role here as partners and agencies is, habitat protection. And we have to be thinking about the watershed. We have to be thinking about, every time it rains, we need that rain going down into the ground and not sideways directly into the river. Because it's when that groundwater is allowed to infiltrate that it can cool, it can come out in places like Cap Creek or even spring seeps along the main river. And that is literally the lifeblood of this trout fishery and the thing that's going to sustain it into the future. So we're going to have to fight for every single drop of groundwater to keep this as high quality as it is and has been in the past. Couple more floppy fish photos to end for you here. So here's one of our volunteers. She's setting it up. Everybody's watching. There goes the trout. I always seem to catch that on camera. And then just so she doesn't feel bad, this is Evan. He's one of our ace fish techs over the years. Handles like 10,000 fish a year, literally. And even he drops a Namekagon trout once in a while. But the pro move here is you hold them over the bucket so the drop is nice and clean back into the water and then you get to try again. And here's my contact information. I'm happy to share any information people are looking for on the Namekagon River. There's me holding a trout. I never drop them, or at least there's no photo documenting it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Max. That was outstanding. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk about the Namekagon River and about how climate change may affect the river. And I was really amazed the number of different fish species you mentioned in the river,
Mm-hmm.
and that how that kind of indicates that it's not a cold stream necessarily for trout in the future, and that we need to really watch the watershed and help you any way we can. So
Thank
thank
you.
you very much.
Yeah, thanks for being great partners.
Thank you.